Good evening and welcome to tonight's show from DJNTV, DJNTV. Tonight's show is brought to you by Electra Voice, DJ Event Planner, DJ Trivia, Odyssey Innovative Designs and Cases, NLFX Professional, Promo Only, and the DJNTV Insiders.
DJ Event Planner will change the way you manage and run your business. Streamline all of your procedures and software into one easy-to-manage system. DJ Event Planner, the ultimate online planning tool.
Welcome to DJNTV and Tuesday Night with Ben Stowe. Now introducing the one and only Ben Stowe.
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
And we're back for session number 2 tonight. And this is the session where we're going to be reading you bedtime stories, and it's going to be a beautiful thing.
Did you just call me number 2?
I might have. Crap. Ben's number 1.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Goodness.
Well,
I tell you what,
it's a tough crowd tonight.
I tell you what, yeah, it's just boy, I feel like I'm on one of those political news shows. 5 seconds into the show, I'm getting insulted. So,
well, what did we do for the first 4 seconds? I mean, we all had.
Don't pull any punches, do you, John?
So tonight, gang, what we're going to do is we're going to hit a topic we've talked about many a times, but this is a topic that keeps coming back, and we didn't have a show specifically titled "Speaker Sound Volume with the Dance Floor," so we're doing that show. For many of you who have been following Ben and I for a long time, you're going to be able to sing along to tonight's show. If you are brand new to the show and you've never watched one before, like seriously, rock under it, where have you been? Huh? I mean,
well, and if you're, under house arrest like the rest of us,
exactly.
you can watch some of those shows.
Yeah, we've hit a few topics. There was one where we talked about a wire once, and there was one where we talked about things burning up once, and then there was that ice cream episode. And then wait a second, there was a clip of a postal. I don't have the postal delivery clip on this computer.
Did you hear that ding just a second ago?
No.
Oh, that was a notification saying I should just hang up on you.
I should just hang up.
So one viewer cares anyway.
Yeah, that viewer would be. I don't know who would have said that. I'm not sure. So Ben, let's dive into this a little bit. People are wondering how much volume, sound pressure, what have you, they need for their dance floor, because this is always a big question. And from my perspective, when I was younger and had better hearing, I felt I had almost a better grasp of having a sound level on a dance floor being in an acceptable range. But I find now as I'm getting a little bit older and my hearing isn't quite what it was, at times I feel like I'm almost letting my sound pressure, it gets too loud. And that might be someone who is involved with larger and such events like that. Is that possible?
It's absolutely possible, and we don't like to admit it, but we'll just jump right into the science. So there are 2 schools of thought about why people lose hearing, kind of, I guess, 2 primary, and one is called presbycusis, which basically means as we get old, our parts wear out, which I can tell you, as I've been training for my rematch with Howie, definitely the parts are wearing out. I don't remember joints hurting like that. But anyway, so, basically that's the theory, that our hearing declines as we get older just because our parts are wearing out. But there's another school of thought, which I tend to support this one much more, and that is called socioacousis, which means that as we experience loud sounds, that's what wears the parts out. It's not age, it's the continued exposure. And certainly we know anybody that works in an industrial environment, people who've been around loud sound their whole life without hearing protection, certainly some, military veterans, particularly from more than a decade or two ago when hearing protection wasn't quite as prevalent. They tend to have more hearing loss. And so I think that supports the socioacousis theory. So, when you say like people like me who do large events, again, we're exposed to loud sounds. So I think that's absolutely factual. And I've tried really hard to take care of my hearing, particularly in the later stages of my career here. But I think any of us that says that it's not happening to us is probably fooling ourselves. And if you're not going to an audiologist and having that checked, then you're almost in a state of denial. You're unwilling to have the evidence. So while I still do trust my ears because that's all I have, it's not all I have. I also rely on software and calibrated measurement microphones just don't lie. And it's interesting because you opened a can right away with this topic, and there's so many different ways that we could go with it. And I just kind of decided to go with the answer to the hearing loss part first. But the second part is perception of loudness. And this is something that I find will kind of stay with the big event thing. When I'm mixing, the human hearing tends to be more sensitive between 1K and 4K, and particularly right in that 2 to 2.5K, where we tend to find some of that harshness in guitar, where it really kind of bites into your hearing a little bit.
Yep.
And so you can find that by eliminating some of these harsh frequencies and smoothing out some of the offensive frequencies, and that's just one trouble spot I look for. That's not the only one. You know what I mean? Like, that's not fix that and you're done. But if we're kind of fixing those frequencies, the overall SPL can be much louder, and it doesn't necessarily sound as loud, which is sort of counterintuitive. And I'll kind of follow that up in a second with DJ speakers. But it's not irritating. It's pleasing. You can make a clock radio sound loud, but there's not a lot of sound pressure coming out of it. It's just really irritating, and so I think I'll just summarize that too by saying that some people are really surprised when we demo some of the more premium loudspeakers at trade shows, because they say, wow, I mean, it really gets me, but it doesn't seem as loud. It doesn't feel as loud. I'm like, no, because it's not distorting. It's not irritating your ear. It is very accurate, and that's what you're paying for in that premium sense. So,
So are there frequencies then where these premium, more of a premium line speaker isn't distorting and doing things? I mean, are there some of those distorted frequencies that are damaging our hearing more? Or,
well, I don't know if it's the distortion. I mean, distortion certainly is very irritating because your brain is trying to make sense of things, and anytime we have, distortions and unintended harmonics and those kinds of things, we're not really presenting a true and accurate sound. Excuse me. And as we know, particularly every married man knows, there's a difference between hearing and listening, And the example I like to give when I give seminars is that if somebody says something to you and you did not understand them, but after a while it sort of comes to you, you say, oh, I bet they said that. That's kind of the difference. Well, you didn't get to hear it again. It wasn't like you listened to the sound over and over again until you understood it. Your brain was processing constantly, trying to make sense, using contextual clues and everything else, and saying, what was it, that I heard? Song lyrics are great too, right? Rock the cat box. But anyway, our brain is looking for these contextual clues to say, surely they're not talking about a cat box. So, what are we talking about here? I'm pretty sure they are talking about.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
And the sheep don't like it. But anyway, that's that. So there it is. I think those premium loudspeakers tend to deliver the sound a lot more accurately. They don't distort. And of course, they're going to be, they tend to be flatter, meaning they're not as harsh or biting in some of those places. But anyway, not to get into the loudspeaker thing too deeply, just to say that sometimes it's not decibels that cause a sound level to be irritating on a dance floor or too loud. I am always pleased, and I do a lot of older acts. I really enjoy that. I get to work with some of the best people in the industry. They've done it for 100 years, and they've seen it all, and I really enjoy that. So I do a lot of smaller, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 person concerts, casinos, and so I get a lot of older people because they're going to hear the older artists, and people walk in and they see a PA. Like we bring, and right away they think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to like this. I'm going to get my head ripped off. And of course, that PA is designed to provide even coverage from the front row to the back row with as little variation as possible. And of course, I'm 100 feet back from the stage. On average, front of house is about 100 feet back. So that's where I'm listening from, and that's what the level I'm mixing to. So if that's a great variation from the front row to the back, that could be really troublesome. And what I love is being at front of house. People tend to have to walk past you on the way out the door.
Right.
And I love watching these old people come by and say, that was really good. It sounded really good. It wasn't too loud, but at the same time, I'm not mixing, meekly. I'm not shy. We're going to bring the wood to them a little bit, but it's going to sound good. So anyway, it's about presence and which actually is an audio term, so maybe I shouldn't use presence, but it's about, it's about having fullness and quality and enough volume that it's sort of, it brings you into the environment, but at the same time, it's not harsh and upsetting.
So what is if somebody says I want to monitor, have more control over the sound pressure on my dance floor, what should they do?
Well, and we haven't talked about numbers yet. We haven't talked about actual decibels yet, which is the number we use. It's how we quantify that sound. I have to say it's a ratio. It's not a linear measurement, which we'll get to that in a second. But so first thing that we have to do is have a good meter, and it doesn't have to be an expensive meter, but it needs to be an accurate meter. And the thing we need to understand is that because decibels are not a linear measurement, a difference of 10 decibels from 130 to 140, which by the way are obscenely high numbers. Right. I don't know if you saw Ken's post about Batman and the 200,000 decibels today, but it made me laugh a little bit. But the difference between 130 to 140 is twice as loud, which is exactly the same as the difference between 10 and 20 is twice as loud. So every time we increase or decrease by 10, that's twice as loud. So if your meter is off by even 5 decibels, it's way off. It's virtually useless, like having a gas tank that, you have to guess anyway,
Sure.
So I had a car like that once. But anyway, and I brought up those obscene decibel numbers to kind of set the stage for a little bit later because people do use those numbers on forums. They'll say, I got a 140 decibel system.
Yeah.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
So you mentioned, of course, having a good microphone device that would read the decibels. You mentioned also earlier that some of the higher end speakers they can play at a volume and they seem to, because of the clarity and such, they seem to sound different in how much they're putting out. If I would have a higher end premium speaker and more of an entry level speaker, doesn't matter the brand, just a higher and a lower. And if I had my little meter and I'm testing them both, say I wanted to have them both at 100 decibels, measuring the same, am I going to hear a difference because of one being more of a premium line and the other? Am I going to hear a perceived volume difference even though they both test at 100 decibels?
Yeah, I think so. But there's some things that we still need to cover, between just decibels in general. But yeah, I think so. And that's one of those things too. When you're demoing a premium loudspeaker and people might say, well, it doesn't sound as loud. And they might say, why would I spend more to get a speaker that doesn't sound as loud? And I think those people don't yet understand, I would say good sound. It's just that loud is loud, and my customers want loud, or my customers want good sound. And so obviously there's a difference there. And so when you show them on a meter, how loud it really is, that's when I think, kind of, the light goes on and they go, oh my gosh, that thing is really just laying the wood to us. Like I said earlier, that thing is really just pounding. Yet it does not irritate my brain. It's not irritating my ears. I'm not cringing, like I said, turn a clock radio up as loud as you can and stand a foot away from it. It'll sound pretty loud, yet it's got a 36-cent speaker in it, So a couple of things we need to talk about with decibels is one is where. So that's critically important for where are we going to take the measurement at. And the reason that's so important, if we look at how loudspeakers are measured when they're sold to us, more often than not, those measurements occur at a distance of 1 meter. And it often starts from a 1 meter, 1 watt measurement, which is another thing that really trips people. They say, wait a minute, why would we put in just 1 watt? That's not very much. No, it's not, but you'd be surprised how many decibels you can get out of a watt. Some speakers can produce 100 decibels or more with 1 watt.
Yeah.
However, we have to double the power to gain 3 more decibels. So going to 2 watts gets us 3 more decibels. Going to 4 watts gets us 3 more decibels. Going to 8 watts gets us, so every time we double the power, and here's where this gets really crazy. Going from 1,000 watts to 2,000 watts gets you only 3 more decibels. So that's why that initial measurement is so important. But the other thing we need to know is, so if we take that measurement at 1 meter from the loudspeaker, it's going to be pretty loud. Every time we double the distance from the loudspeaker, we're going to lose 6 decibels. So if we go from 1 meter to 2, we've lost 6. From 2 meter to 4, now we've lost another 6. We've lost 12 decibels, which we know is now half as loud, even a little bit less than that. However, if we go 100 feet back and then go 200 feet back, that difference is only 6 decibels over the last 100, 200 feet there. So, one of the critical questions is, where are we taking this measurement? Is it on the dance floor? Sometimes we run into things that are jurisdictional, noise limits. Is it at the property line? That sort of thing. So number one, if you're measuring 2 speakers, make sure you're measuring them equidistant. Make sure that measurement is occurring at 2 identical points from the loudspeaker. And then, of course, get into all the things about, frequency response, because the other thing that is very important about decibels is scale. We can have a flat measurement or unweighted, or we can have about the closest to that would be like C weighting, or just unweighted. Excuse me. Or if you're talking about, and this is not good for music, but it's good for like OSHA uses an A weighting, that tends to have a lot of roll off in the low frequency. Starting at about 500 hertz and down, it really begins to roll off the frequencies that, the weighting of those frequencies, meaning they don't count for as much in the measurement. And so where I'm going with that is that you could have a very high decibel measurement that has a lot of low frequency content, but a lot of that is below what you typically would hear, more what you feel. And it's still contributing to that decibel measurement, but it doesn't make the sound as necessarily loud per se, because our human hearing is more attuned to that A-weighted curve.
So the A-weighted would be much more of a better test for the actual human ear.
Yes, but not very musical at all.
Okay.
If we tuned a sound system to the A weighting, it would sound terrible, because we're going to get rid of a lot of that low frequency, and we're going to put a positive bias, in the peak of the human hearing range.
Okay.
So that's why it's designed for occupational sensitivity, and why they tend to use that for noise jurisdictions and that sort of thing. Although they're getting smarter with their noise jurisdictions. Now they're basically saying, if we say it's too loud, it's too loud, because they figured out guys like me are blowing up these jurisdictional things. I mean, I think I told this story in a previous show. I was told to write an expert opinion for a large metropolitan city council. And I think they had their noise limit at like 55 dB at the property line, which is very quiet. Conversation is more than that. Conversation is, in the high 60s, low 70s usually. Well, as luck would have it, there was an interstate highway that goes right by the property, and the ambient noise from the interstate was higher than 55. So you were in violation no matter what you did, And I just said, this is total nonsense. You know, I mean, like we started the show, this is just total number 2. You can just throw this thing out the window. So now they're just saying, well, you know what? If we say it's too loud, it's too loud. And that's the end of it.
Makes it much simpler. Just listen to what we say.
Pretty much, you know, and as I like to remind people when I teach these classes, 2 things. First of all, law enforcement officer that responds, assuming there's a noise complaint, number 1, they are just doing their job. They were told by a dispatcher to come and pay you a visit. You know, that's the deal. So cut them a little slack. You know, if you're nice to them, they'll probably be nice to you. You know, they're just doing their job. Bottom line, they're probably not an audio engineer. Now, I do have friends in law enforcement that are also audio engineers, so be careful who you pick an argument with because you may lose it. But number 2, even if they're not an audio engineer, remember they carry guns. So, you know, I just
gun Trump's
yeah, just better to be nice.
Crossfader.
So, you know, I'm sure you've got questions, and I've kind of woven a kind of a crazy pretzel with this journey through decibels. But the critical things we need to understand, like I said, are placement and understanding its relation to power and distance and those kinds of things, and that it is not a linear measurement. And here's why that's important. So we talked about that before, you know, that 10 decibels is twice as loud. So going from, you know, 80 to 90 sounds like twice as loud. And I just got a text from a friend of mine who's a cop who is an audio guy, and he says, this is true. He says, we'll be nicer if you are playing good music. So see, some of them have a pretty good sense of humor. He doesn't, but others have a pretty good sense of humor. So he's actually stayed in my house. I better be careful.
Yeah,
he literally knows where I sleep. I've stayed in his too, though. So, you know, I think we're even. But when we talk about, you know, like the Batman post that Ken had earlier today, which most viewers probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but there was a Batman post where apparently in an episode of Batman, he said he had this thing that would do 200,000 decibels. Well, that sounds good in a TV show, but that's not even possible. I don't have all the physics down for this because it's not really relevant, but I believe the highest possible decibel level you can achieve in our atmosphere is like 194, something in the ballpark. Somebody will surely look it up and correct me, but that's just a general ballpark number. And in fact, I think the loudest sound that we've ever perhaps encountered as a species, certainly in recorded history, would be when Krakatoa blew up. And I think that was like 180 or something, which would basically liquefy you if you were close enough to it. So, you know, when we start talking about, you know, these types of sound pressure levels, you know, that's an extreme amount of sound. 120, and I'm going from memory here, like usual. I didn't research the show, but sorry, viewers, it's a free show. You know, it's a free show. Human threshold for pain is like 120 or something like that. I mean, at that point, you're talking an awfully loud. You know, if you go to like a serious metal concert, you're probably in like the 110. You know, C-weighted, maybe 115. And those are the concerts where you leave, and as you're walking to the parking lot, you're like, "What?
Yeah,
I didn't hear you. What?" And the next day, you still can't hear anything. You know, those are those concerts. You know, for a dance floor, I don't know if this is even the question you want to ask, but I'm just going to say, because there's been a lot of debate about, you know, column systems like the Evolve, or, you know, big, more powerful systems like ETX, and of course we're using EV because they're a sponsor. Somebody did ask, I saw once, why do you always talk about EV? Well, because they pay John's light bill. So you know what? Also, they make a really good speaker. But certainly a lot of great brands out there, but we're just going to use those because everybody knows them. You know, and you say, well, how loud is loud enough? I think if you're in the 90s for a wedding dance and it's good balanced sound, I think that's a good level. I do. You know, if you're really hitting it and you got a pretty wild crowd and you're touching 100, I'd say you're there, you know, and I paid a lot more attention to this as I've gotten older, and I've had friends and family members get married, and I've been a bit more objective as an observer. And I thought, yeah, if it was louder than this, I'd probably leave, you know, and I mix rock concerts for a living.
Right.
But I would go, yeah, I'm not impressed. I'm yeah, I want to dance, but I also want to visit. I want to, see the family, and I want to do all these kinds of things. So I think it's understanding context, and that is probably going to vary from event to event. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer for even each individual DJ. I think it's going to be very individual to your client and the circumstance of the, of the event. So
I've got a question on, I've got a couple of people on Facebook who have asked about the decibel reader that you would recommend.
Yeah. Well, we have an inexpensive one. I'm pretty sure we still have it. It's like $50 or something.
Galaxy Audio.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we did a show on that once before, because I remember signing a bunch of them because people asked me to. We calibrated them and then signed them, which is cool. I'm happy to do that, by the way. Honestly, if for no other reason, I would just say I don't have a silver Sharpie here at home and I have to go to the office, which I haven't been there in 3 weeks. Can you believe that? I have not been in our office in 3 weeks. It's crazy. I just left my house in 3 weeks.
That is
social distancing pro here.
Yeah, it's just so crazy to think about. I just put the link for the Galaxy Audio. That's the CM130 SPL meter. And that's one we had talked about.
They've got a variety of models too. You can spend a lot more. They've got some that even have logging features and recording. Certainly you can use software like Smart, which will also record if you want. But now we're getting into a lot more money. And then people ask me all the time about smartphone apps. And here's the thing about smartphone apps. They're not terribly inaccurate. However, you hear another ding?
No, I heard the ding, but I was actually, it's like, oh, that's like saying, I'm not the completely stupidest person in the world, but
well, yeah, that's what I'm saying is they might be off by a decibel or two, which is not as bad as 5.
That's true. No.
Here's the thing, and I am not picking on Android owners, but there are lots of different companies that make Androids, and so there's lots of variation in the hardware, and that makes all the difference. Depending on how many millivolts that microphone is producing, depending on what the Pascal sensitivity is, that's what the software is going to try to interpolate. And so I'm not being an Apple fanboy, but the fact is, because they control their hardware so tightly, the apps for iPhone tend to be much more accurate. In fact, let me see if I can pull this up. And that doesn't mean that, even those should just be taken on faith. This is one I've got. Let's see. This is an app called Audio Tools. It's a paid app. By the way, beware of free apps. As a friend of mine once told me, that if the product is free, it's not the product, you are. I come from a farm background, and all of our cows probably thought it was fantastic that they had free food and free health care until they became food, right? So, just beware. Let's see if I can get to this here. Come on. Come on. And somebody did message, by the way. They said, yes, distorted sound sounds louder than, and we did kind of cover that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, come on. I'm fighting with my app here. But there's a calibration file in here that we can load. And of course, it just doesn't want to play nice right now. Dismiss. Sorry, folks.
Yeah. We've got a lot of folks with us tonight out there on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Well,
geez, I think we've got people watching on every channel.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Everybody can sit here and look at me fight with this. Try to show you how to get to the calibration file.
And Robin's being nice and saying, Ben, you look younger every year. So that must mean that the staying home thing is suiting you.
Indeed. So there we can finally. Sorry. my phone decided to update and the software didn't like it, and that probably happened this afternoon. So anyway, here you can see that there are a variety of now you can see a message coming into me. Here you can see a bunch of calibration files in there for that mic. And so again, there is a calibration file. This says, okay, you have this model phone. Here's a factory calibration file we've generated for you. Thank you for that. But I still tested, and it's pretty close. It's not going to be as close as a good meter. And the more you spend, the better they're going to be. And there's a point of diminishing returns. How close does it really have to be? If you're within a couple dB, it's probably okay. Sure. Remembering, of course, that 3 dB is the difference between twice as much power. Your analogy was pretty good. They're pretty not wrong.
Yeah, they're not. Not so much always.
They're more accurate if it's an iPhone and if you're using a good program. Again, beware of the free DB apps. Some of them have malware in them. Some of them just are horribly inaccurate. I've seen a couple that here's a fun example. A novice audio guy who was working as a stagehand at a show. And we were doing some stuff, setup and whatever. And of course, he wanted to come over and talk, and totally cool. I love that, but he wants to stand behind that desk someday. He wants to be me when he grows up, right? And I tried to talk him out of that. I said, you really have no idea what you're asking for here. You don't. But anyway, we were looking at Smart with a calibrated microphone going through an audio interface that I calibrate it every time. Every time I calibrate it before I use it. It's freshly calibrated. And he's looking at a free app on his phone. And he's like, so there's some variation here. He goes, I don't know if it's my phone or your thing. He goes, but one of these is just a little off. And I'm like, oh, I know. I can tell you which one is wrong. So.
Oh, funny. It must be your expensive device because my iPhone says it's perfect.
Yeah, my free app on my track phone, and I'm not begrudging, but I chuckled at it and I said, well, yeah, I don't know if I had to guess. And he said the same thing. He goes, probably the free app. And I said, probably.
Well, excellent. That gives us a little bit to think about, a little bit to judge our sound by. Again, the link is in the chat of the device. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put that also in the below the video, so you guys can get that in the description of the video. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can go there and catch that. And if you are watching right now on Facebook, I put the YouTube link up, so you can go grab the YouTube link and then go out there, or go to NLFX Pro and look up CM130. We'll get you there also.
Yeah, for sure. And if you ask, I will sign it. And I'll even disinfect it. By the way, two things I want to say. One is all the hardware in the world, accurate or not, is great. But if your guests are wincing, even if your ears tell you it's okay, they're the client or they're the client's guests, right? I mean, if people are, if people look uncomfortable or pained, it's not good. Either your sound quality is not good or the level is not good or a combination of both. So that's another really good indicator. It doesn't matter what's on your computer screen. It doesn't matter what I know these old road dogs that have been mixing rock tours for 40 years and they just grab every fader and jam it to 11, and you're like, oh no, doesn't sound that good. Right. We all heard that. We've all been to those places, and I don't want to be that guy, so I do try to, I kind of, watch people around me a little bit, sort of see if anybody's looking at me like I've lost my mind.
Yeah, and they start covering in ears.
Yeah, exactly. And two, Robin, I discovered Snapchat filters. That's why I look younger. So thank you.
Yeah, we're using Snapchat filters on Zoom. It's great. It's the greatest thing ever.
I'll take it.
John, Day and Night here has a question about if there are any speakers out there. He remembers he thinks a Turbo Sound at one time that had a built-in dB meters limiter type thing built into the unit. I don't remember ever seeing anything like that.
I've never seen one that has an actual acoustic dB meter built into it, and it would be very difficult to make that accurate, I would think, depending on where it's placed inside the box, because of the way that we use horns and devices, and we talked about that, I think, just recently, but how we shape and expel sound from the box, I don't think it'd be very accurate at all. I'm not aware of it. Now, there are boxes that have dB meters on them, but we're talking about dBV or dBu. We're talking about, decibel volts or decibel unloaded. We're talking about the signal, the electrical value of the sound, which would be important for gain structure, but it's not going to tell you how loud the sound is per se.
Gotcha. Gain structure, sound coming in, good.
And if you know of a box that actually does measure the actual acoustic dBs, again, I don't, message me, because I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to see how that actually works.
How they made that function too.
Again, I'm betting it doesn't, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, Ben, let's wrap things up. I want to keep the show a little bit shorter, so that way when folks go and find it on YouTube later, they'll be able to jump in and check it out. Thank you guys for being with us again tonight. We'll be back in about 25 minutes. We're going to be I've got a bunch of questions lined up for Jay and Brian, and we're going to give them the 4-minute timer and see how this goes. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Ben, thanks a lot for going through speaker sound with us tonight. I sure appreciate it.